My brother Luke made my life miserable. Then I discovered he got my wife, Lisa, pregnant and our son wasn't mine. Now he's groveling after our parents disowned him and left me their $2 million inheritance. I have a younger brother named Luke. He's hated me all his life. If you think it was out of jealousy, you'd be wrong. I wasn't the favored child, he was. So he had nothing to be jealous about. Here's the context. Mom always coddled Luke. He was the golden boy. She cooked his meals, did his laundry, and even asked me to help with his schoolwork. I was expected to help just because he was family, but the same courtesy was never extended to me. I came to accept it, being quite independent. Maybe it was partly my fault for always accommodating his needs without reciprocation. He never helped me when I needed it and reached out only when he wanted something. I was a quiet, introverted kid who liked to study and keep to myself. Luke, on the other hand, was rough and loud, just like our dad. I tend to be straightforward and honest, never sugarcoating things. I think Mom developed some negative perception of me because of my bluntness. Consequently, Luke was everyone's favorite in the family. I didn't mind growing up, but trouble began when he started bullying me for being different. He mocked my height, the fact that I wore glasses, and even sneaked into my room to read my diary to complain to Mom about what I wrote. I'd yell at him and complain to our parents, but they'd laugh it off, saying it wasn't a big deal. Luke did worse things too, like nearly breaking my glasses and putting nasty stuff in my food. Once he even put little stones in my cereal, but luckily I found them before they hurt my teeth. I told Mom, but she brushed it off, saying, "That's how brothers bond." Every time we fought, Luke would insult me, focusing on my insecurities. We went to the same school, so he knew I was bullied by some kids. Instead of supporting me, he joined them in calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey, and encouraged them to harm me because, according to him, I was a big failure. Another time we fought over something silly, and he told me to kill myself. That one really hurt because I was struggling with my mental health then. I'm doing better now, but it sucked to hear my brother wanted me dead. Since Dad was often at work and Mom didn't seem to care much, she even scolded me once, claiming it was my fault for irritating him. Things got worse. Luke once attempted to burn my hair in high school, and shockingly, Mom sided with him, insisting he was just playing. Fortunately, Dad eventually took my side and pointed out that there were serious issues. He threatened to call the police on Luke. This was a wake-up call for my brother because, until then, he had never been reprimanded for his actions. He was taken aback, and Dad continued to tell him enough was enough and that he needed to start respecting his older brother. Later, Dad came into my room and talked to me. I never expected my dad to support me because he always told Luke how similar they were, which was true. Dad told me he had waited for years for Luke to grow up, thinking he was just an immature kid. But he realized Luke was becoming a big bully. When Dad said this, I felt so validated I almost broke down in tears. I confessed to Dad everything Luke had done to me over the years and opened up about the bullying in school. Dad was shocked that I was going through so much. The next day he talked to the principal so my bullies would be warned about severe consequences if they continued. Later that evening, Dad enrolled me in MMA at our local gym. He told me I needed to man up and stand up to bullies. I will admit, a nerdy kid like me trying to learn to fight must have been laughable. However, like everything in my life, I am very focused when I want to learn something. I made time for my studies, worked out every day, and went to MMA classes. Not to brag, but it completely changed my life and physique. One day, Luke was at it again. He stole my pocket money, which we got for helping our parents with chores. I had been saving my money for quite some time. Luke sneaked into my room and took my money. I caught him when he was about to cycle off with his friends. I firmly told him to give me back my money since he knew stealing was wrong, but Luke snickered and taunted that all I could do was run to Daddy for help. I don't know what came over me, but I punched Luke square in the face. He was stunned into silence as he fell backward. I picked him up, took my money from his pocket, and threw him back down. Luke started crying loudly like a little baby. It was comical to see a teenage boy crying on the ground. However, Mom came running out, hearing her baby boy, to help him up and find out what happened. When she learned I had fought with him, she was surprised and started to reprimand me. She told me, as an older brother, I should teach better things to Luke. While Luke seemed to enjoy seeing me being chastised, Mom also complained to Dad about how I had thrashed Luke and needed to be controlled. My dad grimly asked both of us to explain ourselves. I told him how Luke had stolen the money I worked hard for and saved up, while Luke tried to justify needing the money for a date, saying as my brother, I should help him. Dad told Luke he was lucky I only punched him for stealing because anyone else would have called the police. He continued to tell Luke he had no right to take others' things without their consent. Luke didn't like that and started to throw a tantrum, probably hoping our mom would side with him. But Dad stayed firm. When Luke realized I wasn't going to be punished, he screamed how much he hated me and ran back into his room, locking himself in. Since that incident, Luke kept his distance. He finally understood he couldn't bully me anymore, and even Dad wasn't supporting his antics. For the first time in a long while, I felt we were equals. Even though he couldn't hurt me physically, Luke would try to say nasty things when our parents weren't around. It got worse as he got older. Each year he became angrier and had a shorter fuse. If I asked him something, he'd ignore me and walk out, calling me a nerd or loser under his breath. If he wanted to say something, he'd go through our mom, who would relay the message. I questioned her why Luke couldn't just talk to me if he wanted something, and she'd implore me to be more understanding. I didn't know if it was just puberty or if he truly hated me. I used to deal with his words over the years, but it got to the point where I wanted to move out to get away from him. I went to my mom countless times, asking if she could mediate a sit-down conversation for us to talk it out, but she always refused, saying she didn't want to get involved. I even asked her opinion on why he treated me that way, but she'd brush off the question. Eventually, I went to my dream university since I was a grade A student and got a scholarship. Dad threw a party for me and Mom seemed proud. However, Luke remained aloof, barely acknowledging my achievements. The day I left for university was a mix of excitement for the future and relief to escape the toxic environment at home. The first few months at university were liberating. I made new friends, enjoyed my classes, and started building a life separate from the oppressive atmosphere I grew up in. The constant fear of Luke's verbal attacks lifted, and I felt a newfound sense of peace. I began dating my wife, Jessica, in our second year at university. My friend introduced us at a frat party, and we clicked right away. Coming from a religious family, having kids without being married was a big no-no. However, we found out she was pregnant in our last year, which prompted us to get married as soon as we graduated. Our wedding was small but peaceful. Our parents were happy for us, and we had a good time. At that moment, I believed she was the love of my life. I always held the mindset that I wanted monogamy in life, one woman to come home to and be with for the long haul. Despite women trying to engage with me over the years, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely content in my marriage. Jessica was my dream girl, and I never wanted to hurt her. However, over the years I discovered she was being unfaithful twice. One was an off-and-on affair with her married co-worker, and the other was a fling with an ex she dated in high school when she visited her family. I'm sure some might call me foolish, and looking back, I can't really deny it myself. After a period of separation in both situations, I forgave my wife. I didn't want to raise my child in a broken home, and I believed we could overcome these challenges. We were quite young when the situation with her co-worker occurred, so I chalked it up to youthful mistakes and not thinking things through. For a while, things seemed okay. I could never fully trust her, but I tried my best to push aside my doubts because, if I chose to forgive her, I had to work towards moving past it and starting with a clean slate. It's been 4 years since the second time she was unfaithful, and I felt I made the right decision by giving her a chance to show she still wanted to be in our marriage. For years, Jessica seemed to have changed, and we were genuinely happy with plans for the future of our family. However, 3 months ago, my reality was shattered by yet another incident, far worse than the others. When she revealed she had been sleeping with someone for quite some time and suggested our son might not be mine, I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. A mix of shock, betrayal, and disbelief overwhelmed me. I struggled to comprehend the enormity of what she disclosed. In a daze, I asked why she kept such a significant secret, and how she could do something so devastating. Her reaction was cold and indifferent. She seemed detached, almost unbothered by the pain she inflicted. Her responses were vague, leaving me with more questions than answers. It was surreal and painful, confronting shattered trust and uncertainties about my family. I continued to ask Jessica to tell me the truth, because I deserved to know the father of the child, since I had been raising our son from the beginning. In the end, she admitted it was Luke. My eyes widened in shock as I asked what exactly she meant by that. This is when Jessica told me how she and Luke had become friends when I introduced her to my family, and she stayed with us from Thanksgiving to New Year's. I remember Luke, usually cold to me, was quite polite and warm toward her. I was glad because I didn't want Jessica to feel unwelcome. She wanted to be accepted into my family, so she spent significant time hanging out with Mom. She noticed that Luke and I weren't close and questioned me about it. I finally opened up to her about my childhood with Luke and told her we might never repair our relationship since he couldn't move past his feelings. Jessica understood. However, she started including Luke whenever we went out, hoping we would warm up to each other. If we watched a movie, she'd invite Luke, and we'd watch whatever he wanted. During this time, Luke and I talked a bit, which was a significant improvement. I remember Jessica and Luke hanging out and playing video games together, but I never thought much about it. Jessica told me one day Luke opened up to her about his struggles and recent breakup with his ex-girlfriend. He seemed so vulnerable with her, and they struck up a friendship. She said he sometimes harmlessly flirted when I wasn't around. And apparently one thing led to another, and she couldn't control herself anymore. I closed my eyes, envisioning my wife and brother sleeping together, which almost made me puke. I felt a mix of rage and disgust after Jessica told me all this. She decided to go back home, which was true because she abruptly told me she wanted to go back home when I thought she'd be spending New Year's with me. I tried to convince her to stay, but she was adamant about leaving after the holidays. When we met in college, once our classes resumed, she was back to her usual cheerful self, so I never questioned anything. 2 weeks after that, we found out she was pregnant. Jessica told me she had no idea whether it was really my child or Luke's and had no way to find proof. Because I was already stepping up, she knew I was the more dependable brother, so she decided to stay with me. This is why we got married. I felt like my whole world was crashing down around me. The son I had loved and spent countless hours with might not even be mine. I questioned her if she had been sleeping with Luke recently, and she nodded slowly. Jessica told me how she and Luke had always stayed in touch because their chemistry was undeniable. They would sneak off to hotels when she lied to me about working overtime. She told me half of her business trips were just romantic getaways with him. I asked Jessica why she would even be married to me if she really wanted my brother. Jessica told me she did not want to be the one to break off a marriage. Seeing how I was such a wonderful father to our son, she stayed with me all this while. In her words, she had made a mistake and didn't know when to stop. I told Jessica I was glad she told me the truth, and that I was going to pack up and move out. Jessica started to cry and ask for my forgiveness, telling me I was supposed to scream and yell at her. But here I was, calmly thinking of my next move. I remained quiet while I walked to my cupboard and started packing some of my clothes into my suitcase. Jessica kept saying if I really loved her, then I should at least try to fight for her. She said mistakes happen in every marriage. When she realized I wasn't going to do anything, she changed her tactic and told me how our son would be affected if we got a divorce, and how children should not be brought up in a broken home. I reminded her I might not even be the father, which reduced her to tears, and she started to yell at me about being cruel, and how I could easily walk away when I had been there for the child since his birth. It seemed like my wife believed there was nothing that could make me want out of our marriage. I guess it was partly my fault for letting a lot slide in the past. While I did have some love for her, it felt more like it stemmed from the fact that I thought we had a son together and had been together since college. Jessica continued to claim it was not too late and that we could work things out, but I struggled to believe it and felt like I had no more patience to deal with her. Trust was a major issue for me, and her words felt empty. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget that she had slept with my own brother. I have always believed people could make mistakes and be forgiven because we're all flawed, but this went beyond a certain limit. I left her crying on the doorsteps and checked into a hotel. The next day, I went straight to my parents and told them everything about my wife's affair with Luke and how they had been sleeping together for years behind our backs. The shock on their faces was evident. My mother, true to her nature, initially tried to defend Luke, telling me this could not be true since her boy could never do something like this to his own brother. Determined to expose the truth, I requested my parents to remain silent and allow me to call Luke right in front of them. I told them not to make a sound since this was how I could expose Luke's true colors. I wanted him to think it was just a private conversation between us so he could hopefully let his guard down. As Luke picked up, I confronted him with the revelation of his affair with my wife. Initially, he denied it vehemently and refused to accept it. When I told him Jessica had admitted to everything, he started to blame Jessica, labeling her as characterless. He told me it was not his fault if women were attracted to him and that he was the better-looking brother. I told him firmly I was going to expose him in front of everyone. When Luke mocked that no one would believe me and that he was the golden child anyway, I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth, since our parents had heard everything. Luke went quiet and then spluttered to explain himself, stumbling over his words in an attempt to salvage his image. My mother, still grappling with shock, demanded an explanation from Luke. He stuttered through a feeble attempt to justify his actions, blaming everyone else but himself and desperately trying to shift the blame onto Jessica. I could see my mother, who was once protective of her favored son, now felt a mix of disappointment and anger. In that charged moment, I felt a strange sense of vindication. For years I had endured Luke's torment, and now the truth had come to light. The roles were reversed. Luke stood exposed, his actions laid bare for everyone to see. As Luke's words faltered, my father, usually reserved in his expressions, couldn't contain his disappointment. He asked me to pass him the phone and went off on Luke. "What you've done is not just a betrayal of your brother, but a betrayal of this family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued to sleep with her even after they got married. Your actions have consequences, and they have irreversibly damaged the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family loyalty and decency. What you've shown today goes against everything I've tried to instill in you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on Luke's conscience. "The disregard for your brother's feelings, the lack of respect for the sanctity of his marriage, it's unacceptable. You've not only hurt him but tarnished the bonds that hold us together as a family. I feel like your mom and I are to blame for what you have become, and we will no longer let you get away with this behavior anymore. Starting today, I am cutting you off from the college funds I set up for you. You can figure out on your own about your university fees. I will also not be funding your lifestyle anymore. You think it makes you more of a man to sleep with married women? Well, now let's see what happens to you when you don't have my money to depend on." I maintained a composed demeanor throughout all this. Although I initially wanted to scream at Luke, watching my dad punish him was the ultimate vindication. I had exposed his true nature, and it was clear he had underestimated the consequences. My mother, Luke persistent in his protests, continued to justify himself. But my father swiftly ended the call, shutting down Luke's attempts to explain away his actions. My mom came up to me and hugged me. It had been a while since we shared such a moment, but in that embrace there was unspoken understanding and support amid the family turmoil. She apologized to me for not believing me all this time. I felt like my 14-year-old self would never have imagined this moment, being vindicated and embraced by my mother. After that, my dad helped me find a good lawyer so I could divorce Jessica. She and her lawyer tried to fight dirty by asking me for alimony since I earned more than her, but luckily her affair played heavily in my favor. We also had a paternity test for my son, and it was determined that Luke was indeed the father of the child. I can't begin to describe how painful it was for me to digest this news. It was worse than when Jessica told me she had been cheating on me. I felt so angry that my son didn't belong to me. However, I guess God works in mysterious ways because I decided to stay strong throughout all this. Jessica begged me to keep visiting my son since he should not be punished for all this, but I just could not bear to see him. He reminded me of Luke, and I hated it. After my divorce was finalized and I was finally free, I moved into my own bachelor pad. It felt surreal living on my own since I had married so young and never really lived on my own. However, since I had always been independent, I was quick to adapt to my bachelor lifestyle, and I honestly loved it. 2 weeks ago, my dad called me to let me know he had been thinking of changing his will since he didn't want to give Luke anything. If there's one thing to know about my dad, it is that he is extremely stubborn. Since he had made up his mind that he wanted nothing to do with Luke, he kept his word. Luke tried to reach out to our parents and even showed up at their doorstep begging for forgiveness, but he was not even allowed inside. My mother, who usually caves into Luke's tantrums, also seemed to be done with him, although it must be hurting her the most. Throughout all this, Luke didn't even once send me a text to apologize for what he had done, so clearly he didn't even regret it. He was just sad about being cut off from our parents. Well, Dad told me he would be leaving everything behind to me just to ensure that Luke doesn't protest later. He would be leaving him with only $1. My eyes widened in shock, as my dad had worked really hard his whole life. Including his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance, it would come up to almost $2 million. The only clause in his will was that if my dad passed away before my mom, she would continue to live in their house, even though the ownership would go to my name. Of course, I didn't mind this, since I would want to take care of my mom until her last days. I don't know how, but Luke found out about all this, and since he couldn't reach my parents, he called me yesterday trying to mend things between us. He told me how he had been having trouble keeping up with college, and that after Jessica had found out about the paternity of the child, she had been pestering him about child support. He told me he had no money and was looking for part-time jobs yet couldn't find anything. He begged me to talk to our family so we could start fresh since he really needed my help. I started to laugh in his face and told him that I was done with him and that he should have thought about all this before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. Luke started to argue that I was being unfair, and that she was to blame also, to which I agreed and reminded him how I did divorce her, and now she was his responsibility, so he should not be calling me complaining about her or her child since these were the consequences of his own actions. Luke started to raise his voice, but I cut him off and reminded him that he was no longer the favored child in the family, but the black sheep who slept with his own brother's wife. Luke started to cry at this point and told me how everyone had been on him, including our grandparents and relatives, which was true. But this was no longer my concern. I told him that we were done and to never call me again since I was no longer his brother. Since then, I've been replaying the conversation over and over in my head. Although I hate my brother, I had never heard him cry, at least not since we grew up. I won't lie, but it did hurt me a bit that he was this helpless. So I guess I'm here to ask if I should talk to our parents about him, or if I would be an a-hole if I didn't. Hi everyone, a lot of you have been asking why I am no longer in contact with my son Danny, and some of you have also called me cruel. Well, I'm sorry to say this, but I don't feel comfortable raising another man's child. This is not a stepson scenario. In this case, I was led to believe that he was my son, and then I discovered he was my brother's son. Of course, I am hurt, and I have cried over it for days. But the reason I don't want any contact with Danny is because I no longer want Jessica in my life. If I talk to her child, she will find a way to snake her way into my life again, and I need my own space. You can call me cruel or selfish, but I can't see him ever again, or at least not for a very long time. Most of you correctly guessed that it was my mother who told Luke about my dad changing his will. Luke called me as a last resort to mend things. I confronted her in front of my dad, and she broke down. She told me how I had punished Luke enough and that he had learned his lesson. My dad firmly told my mother that if she felt what Luke did was forgivable, then he could no longer stay married to her since he could never forgive Luke for this betrayal. His threat seemed to shut my mother up. Dad made it clear to her that if she ever talked with Luke and we found out, then she could pack her bags and leave. Like I said, my dad is a very stubborn guy. Hopefully my mother will learn from her mistakes. It's been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has improved over the last couple of months. Dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he behaves more like a buddy than my father. My mother, even though she misses Luke, has stayed away from him. The last I heard about Luke was from my cousin, who told me how Luke had been asking everyone for money and in the end had to drop out of college when he couldn't afford to pay his fees anymore. He and Jessica are living together, and he even has a job as a part-time mechanic. Apparently, they are raising Danny together, which is a good thing, I guess. I never bring up Luke in discussions with my parents, and neither do they. For everyone asking, I am doing quite well. I was promoted at my job 2 months ago, so my salary has improved significantly. I haven't been dating anyone since I feel like I still need time and space to heal. I've been going to a few therapy classes, so I guess we'll see how that works out. It's been a roller coaster of emotions these past months. To say I've had my ups and downs would be an understatement. My cousin Jake keeps me updated on Luke and Jessica. From what he says, their relationship is anything but rosy. Jessica's true colors are showing more than ever. She's been making Luke's life a living hell, and honestly, I can't say I'm surprised. She was never content with anything and always demanded more than I could give. Now Luke is getting a taste of what I dealt with for years. A part of me feels a bit of satisfaction knowing that karma has come around, but another part feels sorry for Danny. He's just a kid, caught in the crossfire of all this drama. Despite everything, I do hope he's being taken care of. Luke may be a lot of things, but he is still my brother, and I hope he steps up for his son's sake. My therapy sessions have been a real eye-opener. I've been unpacking a lot of baggage I didn't even know I was carrying. My therapist, Dr. Sanders, has been a huge help. She says I need to focus on myself and my healing before I can even think about moving forward. She's right, of course, but it's not easy. I've spent so much of my life trying to please others. My parents, Jessica, even Luke at times. It's high time I start living for myself. Last weekend, Dad and I went golfing again. It's become our thing, and I cherish these moments. We talk about everything and nothing, and it feels good to have that bond with him. Mom is still distant, but she's trying. She misses Luke, and I get that. No matter what he did, he's still her son. But Dad is firm. Luke needs to face the consequences of his actions, and I respect that stance. Work has been a great distraction. Getting promoted was a big deal for me, not just financially, but emotionally too. It's like a validation that I'm good at something, that I can succeed on my own terms. My boss, Mr. Thompson, has been very supportive, understanding my situation and giving me the flexibility I need. I've thought about dating again, but honestly, I'm not ready. The wound is still too fresh, and I don't want to bring someone else into my mess. My friend Tom tried setting me up with his cousin, but I declined. Right now, I need to focus on rebuilding myself. Every now and then, I catch myself thinking about what could have been. If Jessica hadn't cheated, if Luke hadn't betrayed me, would things be different? Maybe, but there's no point dwelling on the past. What's done is done. All I can do is move forward one step at a time. I'm taking things day by day, trying to find a new normal. I've picked up some hobbies: woodworking, jogging, even started learning guitar. It keeps my mind occupied and gives me something to look forward to. Life goes on, and I'm determined to make the best of it. So here I am, a single guy in his 30s, trying to figure out what's next. It's not where I expected to be, but maybe that's the point. Life throws you curveballs, and you just have to learn how to hit them. I've been through the ringer, but I'm still standing, and that counts for something. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself slowly settling into a routine. My mornings started with a jog around the neighborhood, something I'd never had time for before. The fresh air and the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement became a form of therapy. It was during these quiet moments that I did a lot of thinking, sorting through the mess of emotions and memories. My woodworking projects were coming along nicely. I built a bookshelf for my living room and even made a small table for my patio. There's something satisfying about creating something with your own hands, seeing the tangible results of your efforts. It reminded me that I was capable of building something good from scratch, even if my personal life had been torn apart. Dad and I kept up our golfing weekends. Each time we played, we talked a bit more about the future and a bit less about the past. It was a slow process, but I could see he was proud of me, not just for what I was achieving at work, but for how I was handling everything. It meant a lot having his support. Mom was still struggling. I'd catch her looking at old photos of Luke and me, her eyes filled with a sadness she couldn't quite hide. She missed Luke, but she respected Dad's decision to cut him off. It was a tough position for her, and I tried to be patient, understanding her love for both her sons despite everything that had happened. Work continued to be a positive distraction. My boss, Mr. Thompson, gave me a challenging project that required all my attention. It was exactly what I needed. Diving into work helped keep my mind off Jessica and Luke. The project was a success, and with it came a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in a long time. Jessica tried reaching out a few times. She sent messages claiming she wanted to talk things through for Danny's sake. I ignored her. There was nothing left to say. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me back into her chaotic world. I needed peace, and she was a source of endless drama. Jake, my cousin, kept me in the loop about Luke and Jessica. According to him, they were barely getting by. Luke was working as a part-time mechanic, and Jessica was still as demanding as ever. Their relationship was strained, to say the least. Part of me felt vindicated, knowing that Luke was facing the consequences of his actions. But another part of me just felt tired, wishing this whole ordeal could be behind me. Therapy sessions with Dr. Sanders were helping. She encouraged me to focus on my own happiness, to find joy in small things, and to forgive myself for any perceived failures. It was hard work, but I could feel myself healing bit by bit. One evening, as I was strumming my guitar on the patio, I realized something important. Life wasn't about what I'd lost, but about what I could still gain. Yes, Jessica and Luke had betrayed me, but I wasn't going to let their actions define the rest of my life. I had the power to shape my own future, to build something meaningful from the ruins. I decided to sign up for a woodworking class at the local community center. It was a chance to improve my skills and meet new people. I also joined a book club, something completely out of my comfort zone but surprisingly enjoyable. These small steps were helping me rebuild my life piece by piece. So here I am, navigating the ups and downs of life with a bit more confidence each day. I'm learning to embrace the uncertainty, to find strength in my resilience. It's not an easy road, but it's mine, and I'm determined to make the most of it. To anyone out there dealing with betrayal and heartache, know that you're not alone. It's okay to take your time to heal at your own pace. Life goes on, and it's up to us to decide how we move forward. For now, I'm focusing on me, on building a future that's bright and full of possibilities. And that's enough. As the months passed, I found myself growing stronger and more self-assured. My new hobbies and routines provided a sense of stability and purpose that had been missing for so long. I continued to build furniture in my woodworking class, making a few friends along the way who shared my interest in crafting and creating. One day, while I was sanding down a piece of cherry wood for a coffee table, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from an old college friend, Mike, inviting me to a barbecue at his place. I hesitated at first, remembering how social gatherings used to include Jessica. But then I thought, why not? It's time to reconnect with people who genuinely care about me. The barbecue was a refreshing change of pace. Mike and his wife Sarah were warm and welcoming. We reminisced about our college days, laughing about old memories. It felt good to be around people who knew me before everything fell apart. Mike introduced me to some of his friends, and I ended up having a long, engaging conversation with a woman named Emily. She was smart, funny, and easy to talk to, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. Jessica, on the other hand, continued to try and worm her way back into my life. Her messages became more frequent, each one dripping with a mix of fake sweetness and veiled threats. "You know Danny misses you," she would say, trying to guilt me into a response. But I stood firm, ignoring her attempts to manipulate me. Luke's situation was deteriorating as well. Jake told me that Luke and Jessica were fighting constantly. Jessica's bitchiness had reached new heights, and Luke was struggling to cope with the pressure of supporting her and Danny. I couldn't muster any sympathy for him. He made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. Work was going exceptionally well. The project I had been working on was a huge success, and Mr. Thompson was thrilled with the results. He even hinted at a potential promotion in the near future. It was a validation of my hard work and a reminder that I was capable of achieving great things on my own. My relationship with Dad grew stronger with each passing week. Our golfing weekends were a highlight, a time to bond and share our thoughts. He was my rock, always offering sage advice and a listening ear. Mom was still torn, but she respected my need for space from Luke and Jessica. She tried to bridge the gap between us, but I made it clear that I wasn't ready to forgive and forget. One evening, as I was sitting on my patio, guitar in hand, I received a call from Dr. Sanders. She wanted to check in and see how I was doing. I told her about the progress I was making, about the new hobbies and the budding friendships. She was pleased and encouraged me to keep moving forward, to keep focusing on my own happiness. I decided to take her advice to heart. The next day I signed up for a local 5K run. It was something I had never done before, but I wanted to challenge myself, to push my boundaries. Training for the run gave me a new goal, something to strive for. It was tough at first, but with each passing day I felt my stamina and confidence grow. Emily and I started seeing each other more often. We took things slow, both of us wary of rushing into anything serious. She knew about my past, about Jessica and Luke, and she was incredibly understanding. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of life's ups and downs. As I crossed the finish line of the 5K run, I felt a surge of pride and accomplishment. It was more than just completing a race. It was a symbol of my journey, of overcoming the pain and betrayal that had once consumed me. Emily was there to cheer me on, and as she hugged me I realized that life had a way of bringing unexpected blessings. Reflecting on everything that had happened, I knew I still had a long way to go. But I was on the right path, building a future that was mine and mine alone. Jessica and Luke were part of my past, but they no longer had the power to control my present or my future. I was moving forward, one step at a time, and that was more than enough. So here I am, continuing to navigate the twists and turns of life. I've learned to find joy in the little things, to appreciate the people who truly care about me, and to never take anything for granted. It's been a hard journey, but it's also been incredibly rewarding, and with each new day I'm reminded that I have the strength to keep going, to keep building, and to keep living my best life. The months continued to roll by, and I found myself more settled into my new life. The initial sting of betrayal had dulled to a manageable ache, and I was learning to navigate the world with a newfound sense of purpose and resilience. My relationship with Emily was blossoming, bringing a sense of warmth and companionship that I hadn't felt in a long time. She was a steady presence, someone who understood my past but didn't let it define our future together. Jessica's attempts to reach out grew more desperate and shrill. Her messages alternated between saccharine pleas and venomous accusations. "You're abandoning your son," she'd say, trying to play on my guilt. But I saw through her manipulations. I knew she was more concerned about her own comfort and control than Danny's well-being. I kept my distance, focusing on building a life that was stable and healthy, free from her toxicity. Luke's situation continued to decline. Jake told me that Luke and Jessica's relationship was hanging by a thread. They argued constantly, and Jessica's demanding nature was pushing Luke to his limits. He was struggling to keep up with the responsibilities he had taken on. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction knowing he was finally facing the consequences of his actions, but another part of me still felt the sting of betrayal. Work remained a bright spot in my life. The project that had earned me praise led to even more opportunities. Mr. Thompson was true to his word, and I received a promotion that came with increased responsibilities and a substantial raise. It was validation of my hard work and proof that I could thrive on my own terms. My relationship with my dad continued to grow stronger. Our golfing weekends had become a cherished tradition, a time to bond and share our thoughts. He was my rock, always offering support and wisdom. My mom, while still struggling with the situation, had come to respect my boundaries. She understood that while I wasn't ready to forgive Luke, I needed to move forward for my own sake. One evening, as Emily and I sat on the patio enjoying the cool night air, I reflected on how far I'd come. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. I had built a new life, one filled with hope and possibilities. Emily's presence was a constant reminder that I could find happiness again, that I was deserving of love and respect. Dr. Sanders continued to be a guiding light in my journey. Her insights and encouragement helped me stay focused on my own growth. She often reminded me that healing was a process, one that required patience and self-compassion. I was learning to embrace that truth, taking each day as it came. The community center woodworking class had become a highlight of my week. I had made new friends, and our shared passion for crafting created a strong bond. I had even started teaching a beginner's class, sharing my skills and helping others find the same sense of accomplishment and peace that I had discovered. It was rewarding to see others find joy in something that had helped me heal. As the year drew to a close, I realized just how much I had transformed. I had gone from a man shattered by betrayal to someone who was rebuilding his life with intention and care. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. I had surrounded myself with people who cared about me, found new passions, and learned to value myself in ways I never had before. Emily and I decided to take a weekend trip to the mountains, a way to celebrate the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As we hiked through the scenic trails, breathing in the crisp, fresh air, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It was a moment of clarity, a realization that I had the strength to move forward, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Looking back, I saw how far I had come, and it gave me confidence for the future. I knew there would still be hard days, moments of doubt and pain, but I also knew I had the resilience to overcome them. Life had thrown some tough punches, but I was still standing, still fighting, and still hopeful. To anyone reading this, facing their own struggles, remember that it's okay to take your time. Healing isn't a straight path, and it's okay to stumble along the way. What matters is that you keep moving, keep striving for a better tomorrow. Surround yourself with people who lift you up, find passions that ignite your spirit, and never forget your worth. As I stood on that mountain with Emily by my side, I realized that the best was yet to come. I had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, ready to face whatever came next. And that I knew was more than enough.